Hey, welcome to another edition of Breaking Protocol from the Razzle Dazzle Show, our ongoing miniseries where we break down key updates and design questions straight from the development of Shade Protocol. These episodes are built around the game's community engagement series Devs Ask You, or DAUs, where Kendall and the team not only show us changing, but invite fans to shape the journey with them. Today, we're talking about a brand new enemy type, the Xavior Rogues. Fast, aggressive, frontline assassins designed specifically to keep pace with Zura as her mobility and combat abilities continue to evolve. The Rogues are meant to represent something different, enemies that make standard combat feel thrilling all on their own. Be sure to follow us and Little Legendary on our socials and YouTube channel, and be sure to join the Shade Protocol Discord server to follow new DAUs, vote in polls, and share your voice directly with the dev team. Links to everything will be in the description down below, and with all that being said, it's Razzle Dazzle time! As development has progressed, Zura has become increasingly fast and mobile. With new movement tools, defensive mechanics, and aggressive combat options, the team realized that they need enemies capable of keeping up with that pace. That's where the Rogues come in. The core fantasy behind these enemies are simple: mobile, aggressive, sticky, air quotes, and fun to defend against. These enemies are designed to stay on top of the player, forcing you to actively engage with your own defensive tools, whether that's dodging, parrying, blocking, or repositioning, all the while maintaining the flow of combat. And while they aren't intended to be among the hardest enemies in the game, they're meant to create those satisfying combat moments that make you feel like you've truly mastered Zura's toolkit. Lore-wise, the Rogues are part of the Xaviers, but belong to their own specialized sub-faction within Arconis' forces. Frontline assassins built for pursuit and pressure rather than range coordination like the Death Letters. Kendall, one of the most interesting things here is that the Rogues seem to exist because Zura herself has evolved during development. At what point did you realize that the game needed a new category, a new type of enemy specifically designed to keep up with Zura's speed and mobility, and how difficult is balancing that?
It's quite difficult. It's way too difficult, to be honest, because the whole point is like to make the combat very, very fun. But originally, Zura was a very heavy character. Like it is very difficult for you to move while you were attacking. And the more we worked on it, the more we felt like it just doesn't feel good to be fully grounded, or not to have like a lot of good movement options. So the more we increase that, the more the enemies that we have become a little kind of trivialized by her move kit. So we wanted to create like a couple of new enemies that were much more aggressive, but also that were not enemies that you could just kind of stagger forever and kind of just kill them as you go. There were enemies that, they will move through you. They will not let you necessarily always hit them, but they're not also incredibly difficult. They're just enemies that will, you will have an easier time letting them do their thing and then reacting to their thing, versus them kind of have to endure you. So it's a give and take in terms of design, and I think they are going to be pretty great because there's a couple of versions of them, and they're quite interesting to fight whenever you have to not necessarily only just rush at them and hit them, because they're so mobile. So I think they're going to be a great type of enemy.
And the Rogue seems heavily tied to the defensive systems of Shade Protocol. These enemies are constantly tracking, sticking to you, and pressuring Zura, you the player. Was the goal here to create enemies that specifically reward mastery of these defensive tactics like parrying, blocking, and dodging?
Yes, plus also there is a lot of there's a great feeling of like joy that players get whenever they do something correct that
Right.
the game is kind of putting them against. So a good component of this involves the enemy creating a situation where you as the player get to do things right. Like, for example, let's say they kind of dash behind you and they take a moment to like do their attack, so you have enough time to turn around and parry, but it's kind of just enough time, right? So you have to react, turn around, and parry. Let's say that was the case. So when that happens, you're gonna feel like you did the right thing. Like you were trying to do whatever you wanted to do, but this moment they moved, they did something, and then you reacted properly, and then the enemy either gets staggered or they can't continue their attack as easily, and then you get to wail on them. So we needed more enemies to do this versus enemies that pretty much their kit is designed on the idea that they can survive you. That's great, and we need a lot of those. But you also need enemies that instead of surviving you, you have to survive them. And this is kind of what the rogues are about. They like to find ways around your normal combat patterns, but they're also not. I wouldn't call them incredibly difficult. They're going to get more and more difficult as the game progresses. But they are mostly enemies that whenever you see a rogue, you mostly are thinking, okay, I probably need to wait for them to do what they do, or you might need to use a certain tool in order to not have to wait for them. But mostly they have control of the situation, but it's pretty fast. Like we have one of them, for example, that we're thinking that you'll see them, right? You'll see them, but as they see you, they'll become stealth, right? So you kind of can tell where they are, but they'll get behind you and they try to hit you. It's pretty, it wouldn't be very difficult for you to turn around and parry it, but it won't be something that you can immediately just go rush at them, charge, and then hit them with your shield immediately. And that's part of what's going to make them a little bit more complex. But there are also moments as you face the more evolved versions of them. Some of them, whenever you attack them, maybe they dodge through you, right? And then, like I said before, and you have to kind of deal with that. They also have multi-hit attacks, which some of them you can just parry, but some of them might be best for you to figure out how long do you need to block in order for them to kind of finish their attack and open themselves up for damage. So they're a more engaging enemy than a Snacklet, for sure.
Right. Yeah, they're up on your ass all the time.
Exactly.
Understood. So what kind of attack patterns or movement behaviors can we expect from the rogues that create that feeling of, this is hard and challenging, but also fun, not like overwhelming?
Yeah, like a lot of the things that we wanted the rogues to do was to put Zura the player in a situation where you're engaging with different angles that are not common. So, for example, one of the attacks of one of the versions of the rogue is that they will throw like a dagger upwards in a diagonal way, and that angle pretty much is what it's doing is tracking you. It doesn't look like it, but it's tracking you. And then the moment that they're in the air, they will come down from that position. They'll throw the dagger at you, and once they throw a dagger at you, they can do one or two things. They can throw the dagger at you from up there, which will require you to be aware of their position. Let's say you're fighting two enemies. One of them can be in the air throwing this dagger at you. So it might not be completely feasible for you to turn around and block that because you have another enemy you're dealing with. But the second part of it would be the part that you might also get this one that throws the dagger, but when they throw the dagger, they charge at you. So they could do one or two things. So they might throw the dagger at you and immediately kind of dash from the sky down at you. So you might have to block the dagger and then parry their attack, right? That's something that we want to do more of, like sequential attacks that feel like you have to do two different things back to back. You can always dodge, right, and kind of ignore the whole thing. But the bigger reward is like if you do it right. So you block the dagger and then you parry their attack. You can do this in one flow. Because in the game we have two versions of the parry system. So one is when you hit the button as the hit is touching you, and the other one is when you release the block as the hit is touching you. So for this enemy, the easiest way is when they throw the dagger, you just hold block, right? It blocks the dagger and nothing happens. And the moment if they decide to charge you, then when they do, you release your block and Sura's going to swat them. And that swat pretty much stuns them, and then you're able to fight them and kind of, get rid of them. So it's mostly creating angles. Also, there's a version of them that they swing forward and then they start kind of they look glitchy and then they kind of disappear and they appear behind you.
Very cool.
So that is it's quite fast, right? So mostly the idea is if you're thinking whenever they attack you, your instant reaction is to block and then instantly swing at them, then you will miss them because they're kind of misty. Like that moment they're glitchy and they're clearly not there anymore. So you'll swing, you'll miss, and they'll be behind you. So it is also to make it so that your instinct cannot always be, something attacks me immediately, I get to attack it back. And that's, of course, it's going to teach you how to deal with certain bosses and other things that you have to kind of slowly learn. And this is very common in games, but most of the time it tends to be something that you learn after dying a lot to a boss, right? A boss kind of teaches you, you're not supposed to attack me now. We're creating enemies that are going to do that work of teaching you that in advance. Some sort of visual cue that, I'm not here, so if you swing, you're going to put yourself at risk.
And I understand that the lore around the Xaviers themselves, this faction, is becoming increasingly layered, as it should, since this is the main faction that we'll be going up against. Just one of many. Now we're starting to see sub-factions within this larger army, where, for example, the Death Letters are sniper hunters, rogues here are frontline assassins. How important is it that each enemy faction has a distinct combat identity as well as a narrative identity? Like, I really think it's cool that each of these factions that we're seeing has so much variety to their ranks, and not just like, hey, there's this Death Letter whose colorway is like blue and red, that's for the Xaviers, and it's like green and black for like another faction or whatever. You're not like reusing them in different places. You're trying to make them unique.
Yep, it's pretty important for many reasons, right? So one component of this is if we can educate players very quickly on how to make it feel like enemies have some sort of distinct identity and how they operate, then it's going to be easier for us to kind of incorporate more and more complicated and cool fighting styles for enemies, because you're going to be able to clearly tell, okay, this enemy of a certain type, of a certain pose, of a certain, kind of body type tends to be, this kind of enemy. Even if you have never met them before, right? Your idea is that it'll make sense how the army operates, right? They have all these roles. They have to be filled in order for them to be a efficient combat unit. So it just makes a lot of sense that they're going to have like a frontliner, and they're going to have like, assassins that are going to get behind the enemy lines, trying to hunt down special targets. They're going to have snipers, and, they're going to have like artillery. They're going to have guys like the engineer, for example. They're going to do like kind of support roles and stuff like that. So the idea is that as we build this army, we're not just saying, hey, here's like an enemy, throw it in there. We kind of do that with the concept of how fun they should be to play. So I'm not going to pretend that everything is like, we're not looking at a military book and, I was in the military, but I'm not using any of that knowledge to say, oh, let me just figure it out this precisely. Because I think that would be fun, but not as fun because it looks too real. But it is a little bit of that fantasy of like, if this was a very cohesive army, they would have all of these roles. And whenever they're together, they're very, very dangerous, right? When they're together. Because the way I imagine, when I design an enemy, the way I think about it is I think about the space they take whenever they are engaging Zura in terms of combat. And you think, well, if an enemy is like a Snacklet, the space that they take is very, very little. Not the case, right? If you have like for example, we call it the melee Snacklet, he's little red dude. Whenever he attacks, he moves forward and he does two swings, right? So he takes all that space in terms of combat, right? So whenever you have an enemy like the Rogue, his space is pretty large. He's very, very large. So he takes a lot of space because if you try to get away with him, he has ways to get to you. If you try to go somewhere where he can't reach you, he'll be able to throw a dagger at you or kind of teleport to you. So he has many ways to reach you. So the not the physical space, but his effective range is pretty high. And that's kind of what we want to do with different enemies. We might have like another enemy that's really, really big and bulky, but their effective range is it's much shorter, but they're much more dangerous if you're in that effective range. So whenever you look at an army, if I was to grab every single one of the saviors and I was putting them on top of each other, right, and they have like little colored circles that show their space, there should be no empty range inside a certain distance, right? It should almost be like a perfect square, if you can imagine kind of where I'm coming from. Like there will be no slot where Zura could be that no enemy in that army can address. So if Zura likes to jump, there's an enemy can deal with her in the air. If Zura likes to like hide behind walls, there's got to be an enemy that can deal with that. If Zura likes to block a lot or parry a lot, there's got to be an enemy that deals with that, etc. So whenever if there was a universe in which they will be all in one room all together, um, they should feel incredibly oppressive.
Hmm.
Um, don't worry, that's not our goal. But I'm not saying it wouldn't be fun, but that's not our goal.
A gauntlet room of literally every single Xavier enemy. Go deal
Yeah,
with it.
you mentioned
God.
that. Yeah.
Um. So with these specialized units, how deep do you want the Xavier specifically hierarchy to go? So is this going to be like our main antagonist, the main faction that we'll be going up against? How far is this hierarchy going? Are there going to be other archetypes or divisions within the forces that you're excited to explore later?
Yes, there's quite a lot, and there's a lot that we won't show. The military structure of the saviors is pretty huge. I'm not quite sure we're gonna get to all of them, as in like people will get to experience every single one of the factions that I have in lore.
Right.
There are some factions that will only show like a mini boss or a boss, and that should kind of hopefully please and scare people in the sense that there was an entire type of savior replica that worked this way, but we just show you the one boss, right?
Yeah.
But if we were to make many of them, they might be a little too dangerous. But there are quite a lot of them, I would say. So in an army, you have way too many roles. You need to have them, and some roles that you might think are kind of trivial. For example, special things like support roles, they are incredibly dangerous, right? Because they are the ones that enable things to be done at scale. For example, like the engineer, I think it's one of the most dangerous of the saviors if you leave them alone, right? They can shoot at you from afar. They have explosives in the game. Explosives are the only thing you can't dodge, block, or parry because explosions, you can't do either of those three things to it. If you're in that range of an explosion, you're going to get hit. They also can summon drones. They can heal others. So it's a very important unit to remove. They're not particularly dangerous on their own, but they make others better, and you kind of want to deal with them. So we want to eventually build more. We'll call it like archetypes like that feel like things that you need to prioritize. Like if you get in there and you see like a soldier, an engineer, and a death letter, it should be a difficult choice. Which of the three are you going to go for first? And that's where your protocols and your build and how you like to play is going to come into play. And maybe you're able to dispose of the soldier incredibly quickly, so therefore the other two are not such a problem. But if that's not your play style, then you might have to like try to get around the soldier to get to the engineer before he starts summoning a bunch of drones, and then out of nowhere you don't have a lot of effective space to fight. So to answer your question, there's quite a lot of different factions in there because that's how an army works. But sorry, not factions, sub factions, or we'll call it roles in the military army of the saviors. But the saviors are not the only faction in the game.
Yeah.
So we know of the arcs, and there's a lot of other stuff. So there's many other groups, so we cannot flood these poor guys, with every single unit in the game. So you'll see more, especially if we can theme them correctly on other factions that will have completely different toolkits and ways of fighting, and they might be someone might be really really challenged by the savior toolkit, but they might have a really easy time with the arcs, where the next person over might be flipped, right? So our hope is that it is not as linear as like every single person is going to have an easy time with the saviors and next person is going to have a difficult time with the arc. You'll see as we evolve the gameplay how you specifically might have a lot more control than you think on how those fights play.
Understood. Okay. Very excited to see what else is going to be in store for us. Before we end the episode, I do want to talk about stealth and or pressure that these rogues are going to be putting on us slash Zura. I think it's very interesting that within the same faction, we have two types of enemies that are very similar, being the Death Letter and these rogues. Being stealthy, stalking Zura, right? But attacking in two completely different ways. One is going to be right on top of you. The other one's going to kill you from a distance. Very interesting. What makes stealthy enemies interesting in a fast-paced action game like Shade Protocol? Are we gonna, or should we expect like sections where both Death Letters and Rogues will be stalking us, maybe just one at a time? What makes them feel different?
So, good point. I mean, I think personally that when it all is said and done, the Death Letters and the Rogues won't feel similar at all, and that's a good thing for us to like keep differentiating them slowly. Because number one, like the Death Letter should come across as a hunter, and a hunter, yes, of course, kind of hides and tries to take the right shot, right? But it's not necessarily like I mean, one thing is camouflage and stealth. I guess you could kind of like Venn diagram them, but stealth, this is more of like the rogues are more like they hide in your face, right? They have like technology to like hide in front of you, right? So they're making themselves invisible in front of you to throw you off, to make it so that you can't necessarily hit them, or kind of, they're not really, I wouldn't say they're teleporting, they're just moving really fast, right? But pretty much they're making themselves hard to target now, but they're assassins. They want to come at you without you seeing them, and then kind of just cut you and end you and then run away, right? They're not meant to have these like super cinematic fights with you at all times. They mostly want to catch you off guard and eliminate you very quickly. That's what they share with the Death Letter, I would say. That concept of like they're not necessarily built for like sitting there in front of you and fighting for hours. They are trying to be surgical and eliminate you quickly. Now, in terms of how they do it, I think that's where they're completely different.
Yeah.
The Death Letter wants to be very, very far away from you, and it wants to control you, versus the Rogue wants to overwhelm you, right? They want to like do multiple attacks that you have to figure out how to block or dodge or whatnot. They want to, like, if you don't like to parry or block, this enemy is very dangerous for you. Versus the Death Letter, it's mostly about timing and about not really letting her get away from you. If she gets away from you and you give her time, she becomes really dangerous, especially if there's more of one of them. Like the chances that you'll get hit and lose a lot of health or die from multiple Death Letters is very high. The same as if you have multiple Rogues. You have a Rogue and a Death Letter together. What they're doing together, if you can think about it, is like the Rogue's not going to let you peel off, right? The Rogue doesn't want you to get away because they're an assassin. So by consequence, you getting to the Death Letter is going to be much harder. That's like the goal. So then the Death Letter is going to have more time to do what they want to do. So if you don't want to play, I guess, the Rogue the way the Rogue wants you to play, you're going to be in a lot of danger, right? Because the way to get through the Rogue very quickly is to either parry or block their attacks. If you dodge and run away, he's going to chase you he's going to stick to you. That's at least the turn design. He's not going to like just stay behind and not get to you. So therefore, they'll get in the way between you and the Death Letter very quickly. That's their role. So yeah, I mean, they are similar in terms that they don't want to be in your face in terms of like having a fair fight. They want to have a very unfair fight. But I think they'll be different enough where one is going to be more focused on tricking you, the Rogue, and getting around your defenses, and the Death Letter just wants space. And if they're far away enough, you're probably going to die. So as you evolve ways to get to them, it's not going to be that hard. Of course, we're not going to let that be the case. But you might sometimes have to, really think like how do I end this engagement as quickly as possible so that I can go and hunt the person that like the farther they get away from me, the more danger that I am. That's kind of at least how I imagine it for now.
This has been another episode of Breaking Protocol from the Razzle Dazzle Show. Want to help what Shade Protocol becomes? Join the Shade Protocol Discord server to follow new DAUs, vote in polls, and share your voice with the dev team directly. Go follow Shade Protocol on Kickstarter, and if you like this breakdown, check out our past spotlights and interviews with Kendall right here on the Razzle Dazzle Show. Remember, the future of Emeria is still being written.